TIE Fighters! Who doesn't love TIE Fighters? I love TIE Fighters. They're maybe the most iconic bad guy spaceships to ever exist. They're built from shapes that are so simple that a crude drawing is instantly recognizable, and at the same time they're ridiculously detailed and complex. There were a handful of TIE variants in the movies, of course, but the basic plan is so modular that there's been a million bizarre TIEs that have shown up in the expanded universe, and most of them look stupid as hell. The Disney canon hasn't slouched on this and is still inventing more TIEs, though they pulled a couple from the extended canon. We got TIE Defenders in the Rebels cartoon and the Squadrons game, and even a TIE Avenger in Season 2 of Andor, which I gotta say, I didn't expect that. What's up everyone, I'm Sublight Drive, and today I'm going to be making one of my favorite TIE series fighters from the old canon, the TIE Phantom, or the TIE with a cloaking device. Originally featured in the 1995 PC game Star Wars Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire, it's only ever had one other official appearance in the Empire at War series. And that kinda surprised me. It's such a solid TIE design, I had somehow convinced myself it was from the X-Wing or TIE Fighter flight sim games, but nope. Just this odd little on-rails shooter that, I'll admit, I never played. The TIE Phantom isn't just a random bad guy in the Hidden Empire either, it's actually central to the plot. The player has to stop the Empire from mass-producing cloaking devices, and they steal a Phantom at the climax of the story. I'm kinda surprised that it hasn't shown up in other media, since just going by the amount of secondary material and guidebooks that reference it, the Phantom is pretty well known and well liked. To build my own, I wanted to start with the Bandai TIE Interceptor kit. I really like Bandai's Star Wars line, since they're super clean and have a lot of really fine details. I made good use of their X-Wing kit for my E-Wing build a few videos back, and the other thing is that Bandai's stuff goes together like Legos. You could practically build the whole kit without glue if you wanted to. Unfortunately, as I put the wing together here, it started to feel like it was just a bit too small. The kit is in 1/72 scale, and although I don't have a specific scale for my Phantom in mind, I do have a sense of how big I want the finished product to be. So I took the only reasonable course of action and got myself a different Interceptor kit. This one is from MPC, and it's in 1/48 scale, so the wings are a fair bit bigger. It's a little less detailed, so I wasn't totally sure if it was the best choice, but in the end, size won out, since I can always replace or improve the detail myself. Now, I only want to use the upper and lower portions of the wing, so I had to get them free from the middle. My Dremel should make short work of that. Once again, the Dremel does most of the work to clean this up, but I'll sand it by hand to finish things off. It was around now that I realized that there was some Greeblies on the edge that were going to have to get sacrificed, but that's fine. They're pretty flat, and I think I can do better. With the wings all cleaned up, it was time to start assembling the body from sheet styrene. Fortunately, it's basically just a big hexagonal box, so I didn't need to get very creative laying out the templating. I've got my cutting machine to do the tedious work of scoring the styrene, but there's nothing to say you couldn't do all this by hand. Once it's done, the parts are ready to snap out and prep for assembly. As always, my preferred adhesive is Weld-On 3, but any other plastic cement or CA glue would work just fine for styrene. To make sure that everything goes together at nice, clean, right angles, I have a bunch of these little aluminum blocks that were given to me by a friend who works in a metal shop. He had no idea what they were supposed to be, so don't ask me, because I don't know either. What I do know is that they're great for putting things together at right angles. A gusset along the inside makes sure that it stays at a right angle and gives it a bit more strength along the corner. Do that 3 more times and I've got a solid little shape for the base. Next, I want to make the vents that go along each of the 3 sides. These are thinner, so they're a little bit more fiddly, and there were a lot more pieces, but the process is basically the same. Snap everything out and put them together one at a time. Once all 3 are finished, I can stick them to the main body and move on to the most exciting part, putting all the little vent vanes in one at a time. Fortunately, the cutting machine did a good job of making sure all the vanes are the same size, so this is time-consuming, but not like hard or frustrating. It was at this point that I realized that the main body should actually be a bit longer than the vents are, so I added a bit more detail to the front of the vanes and then put together a little box the same size and shape as the body to lengthen it by about 1 centimeter. Next, I needed to find a good circular piece. The cockpit has a sort of cylindrical collar before it transitions to a conical shape, so I went digging through my bin of circles. Although the bin had a couple promising parts, it turned out I had the perfect piece buried in my collection of sprue trees. This is the top of a Saturn V model, and not only is it just the right shape for the cockpit, it actually comes with its own little collar. The very tip of it was a bit too small for the windscreen that came with the 172 Interceptor, so I had to cut it down to size. Once the circular ring and the cockpit were welded together, I went to put it on the base and realized that it was just slightly a bigger diameter than I would have liked, but that's nothing that can't be hidden with some details later. And speaking of details, these vents need to have a little bit of textured paneling along their sides. To accomplish that, I cut out a few tiny little trapezoids and then added some panel lines with my trusty scribing tool. These panels were pretty small, so as an experiment I didn't snap them out till after I applied the lines. This worked well enough, but I think it made some of the edges break a little less cleanly. I don't know if I'll do it in the future. Once the panels were installed, it was time to get to the best part, the Greeblies. This is a Star Wars ship, so I know I'm going to need to go extra hard on the little details. Fortunately, I've got no shortage of model kit trees. Unfortunately, I'm building something with three-way symmetry, which means the challenge is now going to be finding pieces that I have either 3 or 6 of. These little orange pieces were, I think, some kind of train car hitch, and fortunately I had a bunch of them, which means I can use them to make some symmetrical details around the outside of the cockpit. Some of these pieces were literally so small that I wasn't sure how to film them. In retrospect, I probably should have left the camera focus on manual, because the autofocus wanted to pay attention to everything except the tiny sub-millimeter slivers of gray plastic in my hands. I also wanted to use the little cockpit-mounted blasters that came with the Bandai kit, so I drilled out a few teeny holes that were just the right size to fit them, and with that done, it was time to focus a little bit more on the wings. Before I do that though, did you know that you can now buy my Atlas model as a flat pack kit? For a few years now, I've had templates available in my Etsy shop so that you can make your own model spaceships from my designs. If you've ever wanted to try your hand at Styrene scratch building, I really do think that they're a great place to start. Of course, they do require you to have styrene on hand, which is why I took the time to start manufacturing the flat packs. Each kit includes 2 sheets of pre-scored styrene ready to snap out and assemble, including surfaces with engraved panel lines, and an instruction booklet that clearly lays out how to go from a pile of plastic to a completed Atlas. And of course, I've also got stickers available for those of you, like me, who stick stickers to every surface you can get away with. Thank you so much to everyone who's already bought a template or kit. Not only are you supporting the channel so that I can make more cool stuff, I love seeing all the variations and greeblies and paint jobs that all of you have added to turn my designs into your creations. So, if you think you want to do some scratch building of your own, go ahead and give my Etsy shop a look. I think you'll like what you find. With that said, let's get back to building the Phantom. The first thing I noticed is that I was a bit overzealous in cutting the wings out, because all 3 had some rough spots on the center strut. So I just cut the whole thing right out. The base of the wing needed to be extended, but that was easy enough to do with a little bit of styrene. The section I cut out gets filled in with more styrene, and I figure if I greeble it up enough, then I'll be able to hide the fact that there's a big chunk missing. Now, earlier, you might have noticed that I just completely cut the wingtip guns right off. Well, now I'm going to replace them with the guns that came on the 172 kit. Oddly enough, they're actually exactly the same size as the ones I removed from the 148 kit, though they're a lot more detailed since they're from Bandai. Next on the wings is making up for some of the details that I shaved off earlier. Some guitar strings make for ideal cables to go on the surface, because they've got just a bit of texture to them. I'm just using regular CA glue to hold them down and doing my best not to get it everywhere. Then a few more Greeblies on the base of the wings helps hide the transition from wing to body once they go together. With the wings done, I still have to make the rear of the ship. It's a kind of complicated trefoil shape, so I cut out a few different pieces of styrene that I'll layer up to create it. Now, the Bandai kit has a stand that connects to this spot right here in the back of the cockpit ball, so naturally I'm going to have to steal it for my own purposes. Once the TIE butt is in place, there's still plenty more greebling to be done before I can connect it to the rest of the body. Finally, it's time to deal with the cockpit. I decided on the 1/72 scale figure, mainly because it fit better, but also because, as I've been talking about this whole time, the Bandai kit is just more detailed than the Pilot from the MPC kit. After priming her in black, I realized that there's not really a whole lot to be done here. I painted her gloves and boots in gray, and then very carefully tried to paint a few colorful buttons and switches on whatever the chest box is supposed to be. Is it life support? I don't know. I have no idea. A few white dots make for little Imperial insignias on her helmet and shoulders, and then a gloss clear coat makes everything nice and shiny again. From there, I can assemble the rest of the cockpit and glue it into place. I primed the body off screen here because I'd planned on just doing the cockpit, but as soon as I started spraying, I forgot I had a plan and did the whole thing. The last assembly to be done here is the canopy. I went through probably about 5 or 6 different rounds of testing differently shaped panels before I finally settled on these guys. Of course, I'm not going to completely cover up the Pilot after all that work painting her, which is why I've got this transparent styrene. Unfortunately, the clear stuff doesn't cut nearly as easily as the regular styrene, so I ended up ruining the first run. For round 2, I laid out the scoring so they just needed to bend along the cut lines instead of actually breaking them apart entirely, which turned out to work a lot better. Weld On bonds the transparent styrene just as well as the white stuff, but I gotta be super delicate about it, since anywhere it spreads to will get all clouded up. And yeah, I could be using white glue or whatever to hold all this together without the risk, but you know what? White glue takes like an hour to dry, Weld On takes 30 seconds, and I'm very impatient. Now, through all that, I got my grubby little fingers all over what used to be nice clean glass, so I'll clean everything off with some rubbing alcohol before we go any further. Masking off the canopy is some delicate business, but a toothpick and a fresh X-Acto blade make for quick work.
Finally, it's time to pull out the airbrush. After the primer, the first layer I'm going to put down is some pre-shading, so that the final coat has a bit of depth and variation to it. I went back and forth a bit on what I wanted the final color to be. In Rebel Assault 2, the Phantom is gray with a very faint purplish hue to it. Not to get too deep onto the what color is a TIE Fighter argument, but in A New Hope they're closer to a flat gray, while in Empire and Jedi they're a much more distinctly blue tone. The TIEs in the expanded universe tend to be almost completely desaturated gray, which is actually how the TIE Phantom in Empire at War appears. In the end, what it came down to is I happen to have some fancy Archive X paint that replicates the exact blue of the TIEs from the latter two movies, and it just felt like a waste of an opportunity to not use it when here I am, painting a TIE Fighter. Once the paint had dried, it was time to do some unmasking. It's good to see that the pilot was kept safe, but the really exciting part was the wings. I really wasn't expecting how much my brain would instantly go, "Ooh, TIE Fighter!" as soon as all the tape came off. The canopy also unmasked clean, though I wasn't worried as much there since any overspray I could carefully scritch off with a toothpick or even my fingernail. And now it's finally time to glue the wings in place. I scraped a little channel in the paint, partly so that the join will be plastic on plastic rather than paint on paint, but the rough texture also gives the glue plenty of tooth to stick to. CA glue, I'll admit, runs the risk of leaving behind some residue, but I'm being stingy enough with the glue that cleaning or hiding the white crud shouldn't be too tough. Now, Star Wars ships tend to have very little, if any, panel lining or pin washes or whatever you want to call it, but I put a lot of work into these details and I want to make sure you can see them. I'm going in pretty light, but this will still help the Greeblies stand out once it's all said and done. Imperial ships get regular maintenance and cleaning, so there's no weathering happening here beyond the wash and that pre-shading from earlier. Finally, the triple ion engines in the rear get a quick coat of red, and I picked out a few select spots to paint a different shade of gray, just to break up the surface and give it a little bit more visual interest. Then all that's left is to stick the canopy in place and call it done. I really do love making ships from Star Wars. If nothing else, they really force me to think more about details and Greeblies. Where to go dense, where to leave things flat, how to layer them up to make them feel like a real piece of machinery. Not to mention that the Star Wars films, and plenty of the newer shows, have made spectacular use of miniatures and motion control shots. In the past, it was the only way to do it, but today, it's a deliberate choice to use physical props over CGI. I'm biased, of course, but I always like to see miniatures get a starring role in things. As always, if you like what you've seen here, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you want to try your hand at building a spaceship like this yourself, go ahead and check out my Etsy shop, which I'll have linked in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.